Back during my junior year in college, I got to see a dream come true. It was one which I'd had for some time. It was when I was accepted for an overseas study program in Sevilla, offered through my alma mater, the University of Oregon. Sevilla is Spain's fourth largest city. Those of you who have been there will know it for places like the Park of Maria Luisa, el Barrio de Santa Cruz, el Alcázar, and of course La Giralda, the tower at the cathedral, which is Sevilla's signature landmark in the same way as is Big Ben for London or the Eiffel Tower for Paris. I was in Sevilla for a little over 4 months. I studied at an institute for international students. Besides the classes that they offered, the institute took care of us in many other ways, from arranging housing to taking us on tours to places in and around the city, to taking us on bus excursions to other cities around the region, for example, Cordoba or Granada. To finance my time there, I traveled the previous summer to Alaska to work in a fish cannery. It was very hard work, which at times I can't say I necessarily enjoyed. But afterward, my time in Sevilla was when that investment paid off. I was determined to make the most of enjoying every second of it. However, there were some moments that made it not so easy for me. These were when I had to listen to other students at the Institute whining about all the reasons why they thought their experience there was so lame. If it wasn't their boredom with the activities, which the Institute worked so hard to put on for us, it was the food served in their homestays. If not that, then it was about some other problem they were having. They were a part of the experience for whom I finally opted not to make a whole lot of time. I had invested my time working hard for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I wasn't about to have my parade rained on by all of these aguafiestas and their complaining. What are some of the reasons why people complain? Perhaps it's because of an unmet expectation, perhaps especially over something toward which a degree of entitlement was felt but not fulfilled. Or maybe because of weariness, ill health, stress, petty inconveniences, impatience, disappointment, or hurt. Perhaps it's because of the fly in the soup. What are some reasons why complaints might sometimes be heard, even within our own ranks as world language teachers? It was the Apostle Paul who wrote the epistle to the Philippians. It was a sort of thank you note to the church at Philippi for a gift they sent him out of concern for the fact that he was in prison in Rome. Paul exhorts them to make his joy complete by being on the same page, by being united together, not looking out for their own individual interests, but each other's interests, according to Christ's example. That is, the setting aside of his divine attributes to become a servant and ultimately die on the cross, to be raised as Lord afterward, and then the part played by the believer in seeking him for spiritual growth according to the process by which we are sanctified in him. In verses 14 through 16 of this book's second chapter, Paul had this to say about complaining. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights of the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain nor toil in vain. Do everything without grumbling or disputing. Grumbling. Translated directly from the Greek, it has to do with murmuring or muttering. It's the emotional side of complaining. To put it bluntly, it's the attitude of a pampered child when they don't get what they want, insisting that whatever it is, they are entitled to having it immediately and precisely according to what suits them exactly. One of the most vivid examples I've ever seen of it were the attitudes of some of the guys I knew from baseball back in high school whenever the umpire called them on an out. I remember how some of them would always come storming back to the dugout, cussing up a blue streak all of the way, then throwing down their bat and helmet and sitting off in a corner, folding their arms to sulk about it for a while. That's grumbling. What about disputing? The original Greek term for this has to do with to question or to argue. It can be simply saying, I know of something way much better than this. If I were ruling my world, I would do X, Y, and Z differently. It's such an easy thing to do. In being a witness for Christ, there are a number of things which we know are not after God's own heart that are relatively easy to keep away from. Things in which we may become ensnared after more of a progression of several steps into compromise. 10 Commandments or Sermon on the Mount type stuff. Things that are much easier to be careful with if we try. They are commands and exhortations over things that are relatively easy from which to keep our distance. Yet with other things, we tend to get struck blindsided. To be more careful with these things does require more of an effort. It's more like sailing a sailboat and keeping the tiller in exactly the right position to keep the boat from drifting off course to possibly run aground. Complaining is an example of what I mean by this, especially as something that can fall right out of our mouth in a moment of irritation or impatience, and so before we really even think about it. Dare I ask if there's been anything over which you may have struggled with in terms of the temptation to complain most recently? Perhaps even today, maybe even so in the last couple of minutes. For any reason at all, be it great or small. If you have, please know that you are in good company, because it's something we are all prone to. I admit that I probably have. Indeed, it really is, as is written in James chapter 3, especially verses 8 through 10. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be this way. And this is part of the reason why Paul exhorts us here in Philippians to do everything without grumbling or disputing. Let's also consider Paul's reasoning in terms of why. So you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights of the world. Ever see anyone as they have wrestled with some very understandable reasons why they might complain, but who didn't? What did others think about them? And how about after a while listening to someone who just keeps at it and just won't stop, who seems to have absolutely no sense at all of how all of their belly aching might be possibly contributing to the very problems they're having? How does it make you feel to be around such a person? Maybe frustrated, drained, not caring to be around them for any more time than necessary? Does it ever reach a point when it's hard to feel sorry for them? Well, I believe there are times when it's quite in order to graciously speak up when there is a problem. To habitually grumble and argue over relatively minor inconveniences will sooner or later lead to complications. Unnecessary complications often having to do with people not exactly finding your company preferable nor desirable. In a community centered around noble causes, including our own, as world language teachers, we are only as strong as our weakest link. How might complaining ultimately impact it? So what are some of the ways in which it's actually better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness? If your inclination to grumble or argue has to do with disappointment over an unmet expectation, take the time to reflect on the nature of that expectation. How realistic or reasonable would you truly consider it? Why or why not? Also, especially when it comes to enduring the grumbling and arguing on the part of another, that I think it's important to try to see things from that other person's perspective. In what area might they actually be in need of help? Though it does sometimes require a step of courage, it's important to go to them and discuss the matter privately toward the goal of working it out. In either case, to strive to these ends is always better than simply bad-mouthing about it in such a way that everybody within earshot is having to deal with the tempests in Teapots atop mountains from Molehills. Especially because of the fact that as followers of Christ with something to say about who he is to us, we always have to ask ourselves, what kind of attitude is what's really after his own heart? As salt of the earth and light of the world, and also as world language teachers, how could we really consider grumbling and disputing a way of letting our light shine so that others would see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven? Why not? On the other hand, when we choose to avoid such an attitude, what sort of difference does it make in terms of how that light shines? No matter what the circumstances, whether in Sevilla or whether in Alaska or wherever, what sort of difference does it make?